I'm not much of an art guy. And I know this is, I think, the third time I've said that, and maybe the third time I've shown you a painting. And I know you've seen this painting before. Actually, the first time I told you I wasn't an art guy was the time I showed you this painting for the first time. If you don't remember, this is a painting from the Dutch artist Rembrandt, likely finished just before his death, somewhere around 1662. And as I mentioned before, this is a painting that stopped me in my tracks, sort of the first time that I saw it, because I knew immediately what it was, even without looking at the title. I mean, it was on the cover of a book that I was reading, so that kind of helped. But it's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. It's a pretty basic portrait. You look at it and you kind of know, I mean, as soon as you know it's about the prodigal son, it makes sense. You see the father embracing his son who is now coming home with rags, one sandal on, another off. You see the older brother sort of looking down judgmentally. You see a few other figures hidden in the shadows. And the very first time we looked at this painting, I argued that the Gospel of John is actually like this painting. Or John likes to hide layers and layers of meaning so that as you read his gospel, the more you linger, the more you learn. And I think the same is true of the parables. Now, the problem with both this painting and with the story that we just read, the prodigal son, is that most of us are so familiar with that story that we immediately skip past all of the details that Jesus chose to include when he told it, and we miss all the different layers of meaning that there are to be found in this story. Now, Rembrandt includes other characters in the background intentionally. It's meant to move our eyes from person to person, noticing the shadows, the highlights, the colors, the contrasts. In other words, it moves our focus from one character to another, which is exactly, I would argue, how we are supposed to read this parable. Now again, as one of the most famous parables of Jesus, this is also one of the most familiar. We know the plot. We know the basic narrative structure. We know the characters and the main themes. And so again, it's too easy for us to skim past the rich details woven throughout this story. And so this morning, we're going to look at the painting and we're going to study the parable, because the longer you linger, the more you learn. We want to slow down, and we want to see what Jesus is really getting at when he tells this parable. Now, if you're new to our church, we are in the middle of a series working through these parables of Jesus. And we've chosen parables that we believe are really popular, really common, but also really distinct, and aim our lives at what it means to be disciples in the kingdom of heaven. That's our goal. We started out this year arguing that we are in a pivotal cultural moment. And we have a lot of choices as a church. We can give in to the anxiety that we're seeing in the world around us, or we can become, how Jesus describes it, as a fourth soil. We receive truths about the kingdom, what it means to live in the kingdom, so that we can share those truths, not just receive them and guard them for ourselves, but share them with those around us and invite others to receive the kingdom as well. Now, that's what Jesus has for us in this parable. And so to slow down, we're going to do that by tracing the three main characters from the beginning of the story all the way to the end: the younger son, the older brother, and the father. So first, the younger son. Now, most of us, when we read the parable of the prodigal son, we know immediately what the story is about. The younger son is the main protagonist. And he's actually an archetype for many of the famous characters and protagonists from all the stories that we are familiar with. So think Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. Luke Skywalker starts at the beginning of A New Hope, Episode 4, the original Star Wars, wanting to leave Tatooine. He wants to get away from home, even to join the Imperial Academy, because all he wants to do is find something new and adventurous to live out. This is Harry Potter, yearning to leave the staircase at the Dursleys under his home, longing for a better life on the other side. This is I've been thinking a lot about Moana for some reason, because I think my kids, it's just in like our car all the time. This is Moana in her angst, trying to sail outside of her island. Intrinsic to this character, to these archetypes, and to the prodigal son in the story is an inner restlessness and a desire to leave the familiarity of home for something better, greener, and more exciting. See, the younger son represents most of us in our lives as we've entered adolescence, leaving our homes and creating a future for ourselves with more exciting opportunities than the places that we are familiar with. But there's a more sinister layer to this character than we might realize. Even those of us that know the story know what he's asking. And even with that, there's something deeper here to understand. And so the journey of the younger son follows this basic pattern: leaving, realizing, and returning. So first, leaving, verse 12. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that I have coming to be." So his father did that. He distributed the assets to them, so to both of his sons. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all that he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his estate on foolish living. Now, already, this is not a great introduction to this character at all. This is not really like Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter or Moana even. He's much more sinister and much more wicked. But understanding the cultural context of just what exactly the younger son is asking his father can help us here. Now, it's not like he was tired of doing chores and he asked for some money so that he could abandon his duties back at the family farm, which is usually what most of us think. The younger son was actually asking this. He wanted his inheritance, so something like what would have been about half of his father's land, but he wanted it early. And so the way it worked was he was supposed to get it when his father died. It would have been like part of his will would have been to leave his land with his two sons, split right down the middle. His son was saying, "I want that land now." Now then he sells that land for cash to spend instead of taking responsibility for the land and then continuing his family's farm and legacy. And so when he leaves, think about this, half of his home now belongs to someone else entirely. So his father and his older brother not only lose the younger son, they lose part of their land and their living. Now, this would have brought double shame on the family. So not only in this culture is it unheard of for a young son to leave his father and his brother with half of their living was unheard of. Now, the father basically agrees to this, which is wild, and we'll come back to that. But he's agreeing basically to be legally dead, which is where we get that interpretation that what the younger son is telling his father is basically, "Hey, I wish you were dead. I want your stuff." This is like you asking your dad to go ahead and just give you whatever he would have left you in his will, the memorabilia. Not just the money, but the family heirlooms, the furniture, the wedding dress, the vintage Rolex, whatever it is. You sell it all away like it's nothing. You take the cash and you head to Vegas. Now, this isn't just a Luke Skywalker leaving home for adventure. It's a young son taking his family's livelihood so that he can spend it on what some translations call debauchery, or more politely what the CSB calls foolish living, which is all a gentle way of saying he spent his money on sex. Now, it's a complete rejection of the place that had nurtured him. It's a complete rejection of his responsibilities to that place. It's a cutting loose of everything that formed his identity. It's a betrayal of home. Now, the question is, why? Why does he do that? Well, that's where this first character takes us, directly into the most depraved and honest parts of not just his soul, but I would argue ours, which is the parts of us that are driven solely by desire. A philosopher and author, James K.A. Smith, who was mentored by Dallas Willard, once wrote that our hearts are like existential compasses and embodied homing beacons. our loves are pulled magnetically to some north, to something, some north, towards which our hearts have been calibrated. Our actions and behavior, indeed a whole way of life, are pulled out of us by this attraction to some vision of the good life. Now, most of us, when we read this story, don't put ourselves in these positions. Now, most of us look at the younger son with judgment and a lack of our own self-awareness, asking that question, how could someone do that? Without realizing that that same impulse drives a line directly through our own hearts and behaviors. See, you and I are the prodigal son when we believe the narrative that to be human is to fully experience the extent of all of our pleasures. It's what, as Smith argued, our lives are being pulled towards, like a magnetic compass, always pointing towards north. See, there's a deep internal anxiety that we feel when we think that the good life is somewhere out there and we're missing it. Our lives are aimed at something, whatever that north is, like a more fulfilling job, a better physique, a more compliant spouse, a church that affirms instead of redirects, relationships that feel easy, satisfaction laid before our feet, or what Jesus calls in this parable, foolish living. And for some of us, this is exactly how we live. Just like the prodigal son, we waste our blessings, our resources, our time, and our energy on this foolish living, even at the expense of others. And for some of us, we relate to this. We know what debauchery looks like, whether it's drugs, sex, money, power, wealth, and status. The remedy to that internal anxiety is the same: foolish living. And for some of us, that's why this parable stings, and that's why we don't like to slow down with it, is because in the younger son, it's not that we look on with judgmentalism, it's that we look on too able to relate. Now, for some of us, this parable stings because, like the younger son to his father and to his brother, we are forced to confront the people that we've hurt and essentially wished dead so that we can reach the fullest extent of our pleasure while minimizing our experience of pain. But for many of us, maybe that's not us. Maybe we haven't lived like these rock and roll lifestyles of drugs, sex, and money. Maybe you have, I don't know. Actually, I know you. I know some of you have not. The younger son lives in us in a deeper and much more subversive way. See, our desires might not push us towards social shame and wishing our families dead, but our desires do shape how we live and what we orient our lives around. Whether it is addiction, debauchery, or tribalism and political idolatry, or even the simple struggle that all of us have to actually abide in Jesus daily. Whatever our issue is, the root of our rejection of that life of abiding in God is the same. And it's our desire. See, Henry Nouwen once described it simply this way: I am the prodigal son every time I search for unconditional love where it cannot be found. He describes the process like this. So it starts with an uncertainty. All of us have a deep wounding, it's inability to believe that we are fully loved by God and by others. And so we push our focus outward, not for the sake of extending God's love to those around us, but to see people who have the lives that we think we want, the good life. And we work towards those people, either to become like them or to be accepted by them. But the more we chase, then the more elusive that good life becomes. And so we get paranoid that we're going to lose it or that we're going to miss it altogether. And that's how our priorities get reshifted. What starts off as good intentions to abide in Jesus becomes something lesser than that. Jesus becomes a means to an end at best. And that paranoia that we're going to miss out on something better catches us in this confusing trap of our needs versus our wants, and soon we feel disoriented, alone, distrusting, unknown, and completely detached from the source of life, or lost. In verse 14, this is exactly where the prodigal son ends up, realizing. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. Now, Jesus naming pigs specifically would have been doubly dishonoring, triply dishonoring, because as a young Jewish man, you are not supposed to interact with pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. So when he came to his senses, that's returning. He said, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food? And here I am dying of hunger. I'll get up, I'll go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers.'" So he prepares to return home. The younger son, what does he expect from his father? Judgment. He says, "I'm not worthy to be called a son. I would never dare to ask to have any of my old stuff back. I just want to be able to eat food again." But we know the story, and we know instead he gets wrapped up in the compassionate arms of the one that he hurt the most. Verse 20. So he got up and he went to his father. But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him. The son said to his father, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father told his servants, "Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Now notice what the father doesn't say. He doesn't call his son evil. He doesn't call his son wicked. He doesn't say, "My son was sinful and now he's not." And he doesn't call his son stupid or foolish, though let me be clear, his son is all of those things. No, he said, "My son was dead and he was lost." Dead, meaning the things that he sought love and life in are the very things that took his love and life from him. Wow. Lost, meaning he was looking for something that he never had to leave home to find. Man, so good. See, the younger son in this parable forces us to ask this question: what do you really want? What is your life aimed at? And what does that aim say about your desires? At the end of your life's aim, is it love that you're after? Is it affirmation? Is it belonging? Is it the fruit of joy or peace? If the sum total of your daily choices, so think about how you spend your time, how you spend your money, what you do when you're not working, what you do when you are working, how you carry yourself at work, how you relieve stress, how you deal with pain, where you go in boredom and in suffering. If the sum total of all of those choices revealed that what you truly desired, what would your day be pointing at? Next, the older brother. Now jump ahead to the end of the story, verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. As he came near their house, he heard music and dancing. So he summoned one of the servants, questioning what these things meant. "Your brother is here," he told him, "and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back, safe and sound." But then he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him, but he replied to his father, "Look, I've been slaving many years for you, and I've never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. I'm not asking for a calf. I'll settle for a goat. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. So which son is truly lost? See, scholars point out that remember, this is a story. Jesus is a master storyteller. This is a story Jesus is telling. And scholars point out that Jesus' audience at this point in Luke's gospel, where we find this parable, is mainly the Pharisees. Now, these were the religious Jews whose only goal in life was to live as morally right as possible. In fact, some go as far as to say that the lost son in this parable actually isn't the younger son at all. It's the older brother, who, just like the Pharisees, looked down on the morally corrupt and reprehensible with resentment and disgust, even when those very people are accepted back into the family of God. And here we get another glimpse into the depths of our own souls. See, if the younger son represents a heart bent undiscerningly towards desire, then his older brother shows us a heart bent undiscerningly towards duty. Now, just like desire, there's nothing inherently wrong with duty. And we devote ourselves in duty to moral and ethical codes that we have been called to strive for and work to see brought into the broken world we live in. That's a good thing. But here's where duty goes wrong. Mixed in with our deep desires to be just, good, and virtuous, which is where duty and devotion start. Mixed in with those good desires is also a desire to be just, good, and virtuous compared to those around us. See, it's when we believe that our duty and devotion to God earns us something that others receive before we do. See, the older brother believed that he was entitled to the good life, just like the younger son, but this time not because he desired it, because he worked hard for it. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. You'll hear no victim mentality from him. He took ownership and responsibility for his life. He worked his way to the good graces of his father. And where does that get him? Well, it gets him in the same presence of the same father as his brother. There's no party. There's no awards. There's no extra estate. Nothing more than his reprobate brother got. Just the loving grace of a father who had enough compassion to share with both of his sons. See, I wonder how many of us rail at God in our lowest moments and repeat the bruising accusations of the brother towards his father to our own heavenly Father. I've slaved away for you, God. I've given you time. I've given many years to you. I never disobeyed you. I kept your laws. I Sabbathed. I fasted. I did the practice. I shared the gospel with my angry neighbor. I prayed. I witnessed. I did the hard work of peacemaking. I restored, at least I tried to, that relationship with others through conflict and mediation. Where's my party? Where are my extra blessings? Why am I going through this season of suffering? Now, for some of us at the stage of life that we're in, after the experiences that we've all endured, after we ourselves have been lost and then found by a compassionate and gracious Father, it's not the impulsiveness of the younger son that we relate to. It's the anger and the bitterness of the older brother that we see ourselves in. See, the older brother in this parable forces us to ask this question. Are you trying to earn what can only be given? See, the danger of a duty-driven life isn't just that it warps our own souls. Also, it sounds funny. I get it. Duty-driven life. Let's just move on. Every time I typed it, I felt weird, but that's okay. I could feel you wondering if I was going to address that I was saying duty over and over again, but clearly not, so I can just move on. The danger of a duty-driven life is not just that it warps our own souls and focuses our attention inward. It's that it distorts and dismantles our ability to extend love and grace to those around us who need it the most. the ones that we determine are too far gone, lost, or anti-God. And we become unable to celebrate any joy in the kingdom that isn't centered around us. We decide that it's our job, our duty to determine who's in and who's out, whose sin is worse and whose sin is just kind of like our own. And that's no kingdom of heaven. That's a kingdom of our own making. And so at some level, Jesus is telling this parable to get the Pharisees to join the party that Jesus himself is throwing, where even Gentiles are welcomed back home. But here's the thing. As far apart on the moral spectrum as these two brothers are, they share more commonalities with each other than they do differences. See, for both the younger son and the older brother, the problem isn't their moral behavior. It's a problem of love. To be more specific, the problem of each older brother is a search for love where it cannot be found. See, love is what both brothers are really after. The younger brother tries to seize love at the end of his desires. The older brother tries to seize love as a response to his duty and devotion. Both fail to see where the love they're after is truly found. See, here's what the older brother teaches us. Love that's sought after through duty and devotion alone only results in resentment and bitterness towards those whom we don't think have as much devotion as we do. Now, pastor and author Tyler Staton summarizes sin this way. Sin is an attempt to acquire love by some means under my control, rather than as a free gift of belonging to God and being made in his image. Now, all of that brings us to the Father. Now, there are all sorts of reasons that the image that Jesus explains here of an old Jewish man running out the front yard to meet his son would have shocked the imaginations of the people that he's telling this story to. So, for one, Jewish men don't run. It's disgraceful, not just like embarrassing, but actually socially shaming to posture yourself in this way, out of control of your own body, and actually even exposing your legs. He would have had to pull up his robe like a teenager. I read a book that said that so disgustingly, like a teenager would have had to do, so that he could run out to meet his son. But secondly, Jewish men especially don't run towards reward of their wayward children. See, this parable is shocking for a lot of reasons. What should the father have done? What is good parenting? I don't know. Some discipline response, maybe, at least like a gentle scolding. Like, let's talk about what you did, son. And maybe that happened. We don't know. But that's not what Jesus shares. Instead, the father runs to cut his son off before he can make it to the house so that he can forgive him. Now, the city at this point likely would have known about the younger son because of how communal people lived at this time. They would have known about his exploits, and they would have known that, their house got sold. Half of it now belongs to a stranger. And I can imagine they would have been waiting for his return so that they could welcome him into the city to heap on the social shame. But before the people of the city can get to him, the father meets him in the street to heap on not social shame and punishment, but honor. So what does the younger son do that gets such an extreme and countercultural reaction from his father? It's not his words that make the father respond with forgiveness and a party. It's not years spent slaving away, keeping his father's commands, as the older brother would have said and pointed to. All he has to do is come home. Before he can make up for his mistakes, before he could even finish speaking to his father, he's already being embraced by the same arms that should have given him punishment. Now, throughout the rest of the New Testament, this simple act of returning home, back to our home in God, orienting ourselves around him instead of our self-centered desires or self-imposed duties, is called repentance. To return is to repent. To return is simply to come back to the place that we belong, which is in the loving embrace of a father who throws parties instead of punishes us. See, when we return to God, either in shame after a life of debauchery and desire, or in bitterness after a life of duty and resentment, God doesn't meet us with more shame, even though that's what we deserve. I love in the story, the son prepares this speech. He says, "Father, I've sinned. I'm not worthy to be called a son." The father doesn't even address the son. He immediately turns to the servants. He says, "Start the party." And he's back. Let's start the party. Now, here's one of my favorite parts of this story. It was while the younger son was still a long way off that the father starts running towards him. Now, in my imagination, and I want to be clear, this is my imagination, but I imagine that the father was waiting every single day, looking out his window, watching every day, hoping that he'd get his chance to throw his son that party. See, it's not our proximity to Jesus that makes him love us. It's not our efforts to move closer to him that moves his heart in response. It's his proximity to us. It's his effort, God looking out the windows of our own lives, waiting for opportunities to come running to us. See, the two sons give us two questions to reflect on, but the father gives us a truth, and it's summed up in the final words of the father to the older brother in verse 31, "You are always with me." So desire or duty? See, both are two extreme attempts at love, and both extremes are met with the same solution. We're already in the loving, graceful presence of a father who would run out the door if he had to in order to get to us again. Now, Jesus leaves his audience hanging. There's no real end to the story, if you've noticed that, and it's bothered me for years. We don't get to see how the younger son responds to his father's grace and mercy, how he must have danced at his own party. We don't get to see how the older brother responds to his father's gentle correction. If he goes in the house to join the party or back to working in the field, hand to plow. And there's no real reason that we don't have a satisfying ending, other than that the parables aren't just moral tales, theological points, or simple illustrations. They're puzzles, and they're paintings to make us look in to see what's really there. The longer we linger, the more we learn. See, I think Jesus left out the ending because he wanted his listeners and us today to write it ourselves. Not as a fairy tale, but as an autobiography. So who are you in the story? Are you the younger son chasing desires, hoping that they'll get you into the good life? Are you the older brother, bitterly looking down on those you see God saving? Or expecting more from God for your obedience and devotion? Are you a father or mother waiting for a lost child to return home? And if that is you, you are not the father in the story. God is. And I would bet that he's looking out the window at your child, wanting so badly to outrun you when your child comes home. He wants them to return more than you do. No matter who you are, the end of the story can be simple. Return home. There's arguably no clearer parable that Jesus tells than this one to illustrate the gospel. So whether it's duty or desire, something else, whatever in between, all of us leave home. That's the story. And we leave the presence of our Father and the place of his love. And what we find at the end of a life outside of this home isn't the good life. It's what the son finds. It's pigs. It's death. It's a wasteland. It's a famine. It's lostness. See, the things we chase aren't any better than pigs and pig food. But we don't have to work our way back to the home that we left. All we have to do is come home. And when we do, the Father humiliates himself. He lifts up his robe for us so that we don't have to heap on more shame. That's what the cross is. Humiliating. We are welcomed into the family. When we return to that family, we get a party. We get clothed in the honor that we've abandoned. We're home.